What's happening, financial coaches? Peter here. Hey, I wanted to talk to you about something that actually just recently came up in a conversation, and it was about careers and career satisfaction and being happy in the job that you have. And for most people, I don't know what the percentage is, but for 99% of the people, they will go through their entire life being an employee of a company, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there probably shouldn't be anything wrong with that, considering that's what most people do. Now, some people go off on their own and be a sole proprietor, a business owner, maybe a titan of industry. But for most people, we're going to be the rank and file, and for me, I was there, and maybe I'll go back there. I actually really enjoyed working in a corporate environment. I actually loved working as an entrepreneur and working as an entrepreneur in my current state. But there's something about having a job. There's something about having kind of that typical balance, the 40-hour work week, the benefits, the predictability that comes of it, the ability to wash my hands of it when I'm on vacation and just check out and recharge and not necessarily have all the responsibilities of every issue or every day's needs come up and haunt me and take up all my time or have me pivot and those types of things. So I think there's a real advantage of being in a workplace. But I've been there, highs and lows. I have been there when people have made it really difficult. I've had tough coworkers. I've had bosses that I really loved. I mean, I can't look back and say that I really didn't like any of my bosses, and some of them I kept in touch with. Some of them, I wouldn't say I keep in touch with regularly, but, I would still call them a good friend and I would be happy to reach out to them. And, a lot of times they were great to work with and they were just friends. And other times they were the boss. They laid down the law and, were very specific about what needed to get done. And, I respected that. And you've got to respect the authority. And I think what we're in is a interesting period of time where for about a generation, people have said, chase your dreams, chase fulfillment, find satisfaction in the everyday. And the problem with that is I think it's gotten kind of changed, adapted into something that is a different than that. And I think a lot of people think it means, finding your passion, do something you're passionate about. I think these are good guidelines, but they are taking things too literally. So if I say, be passionate about your work and there's some element of it that you're not passionate about, like having to be there at 8:30 a.m. every day or having to work a weekend every month or whatever it might be, or having to go through HR training or whatever it might be. There might be pieces that you're not passionate about. There might be pieces that you don't actually like. There might be pieces that you hate, that you wish you could do without. And it's this corporate environment that's forcing these things down your throat and it's just too painful. And so people say, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I want to go give up. I want to go do it on my own. I don't think I should have to work, all these types of things. And I think it's dangerous because there is so much good that comes out of a job and things ebb and flow and there are peaks and valleys. And even though things might be tough, if the economy puts pressure on your company puts pressure on you, to produce more, and maybe they don't have bonuses and maybe they're not flexible with their time off and maybe there's no free lunches anymore, or depending on where you live, maybe you don't have a masseuse, and depending on where you live, maybe it means that the air conditioning isn't running as hard. Maybe they can't get it fixed. Who knows? I don't know what it is, but I know that people struggle at different times and at different places. And, I've been a victim of that too. And sometimes, you pile on, when things aren't going well and maybe there are layoffs and the people that are left are all worried about getting laid off, they start grumbling about it and misery loves company and things cascade a little. But you've got to remember that almost everything is temporary. Especially when it comes to jobs and work and corporate and the economy. And many things are very cyclical, right? And to be really honest, if they were the same every day, it would probably be too mundane. It would be too predictable. You probably wouldn't have any excitement. And I think humans by nature lack a little drama, because I've seen, regardless if you're rich or poor, there's still gossip, there's still issues. And it's funny when I watch some of these TV shows with just super rich people, how all their problems are the same, because I think the human nature doesn't change regardless of the resources you have. So the question is, when people come to you and say, hey, I'm not getting promoted, I'm not being heard like I want to be heard, they're not taking my suggestions, I'm not getting the raises, I'm being passed over, my coworkers are making more or getting more accolades, or my boss steals my ideas, or I've been in the same job, or there's no upward mobility, or it's manufacturing, and so I'll never break into it, or it's family owned, or whatever it is. I've heard it all. I've heard it all, and I get it. I think all those things are fair. But the question is, how do we find satisfaction in our job? And so what I'm not going to go into right now is a lot of the detail on every one of these strategies because there's so many specific tactics. But what I do want to do is throw out an idea that might be a little left field that you might not have thought about. And it's something that I consider myself a specializer in, and I will kind of just give you a little bit of preview of why I think it's powerful for these types of conversations. But if you do get into these conversations, it's probably going to be beneficial to kind of chase down the root cause of it, right? It may be the person themselves. The issues that they may talk about may be all up here, the between the two ears problems. Maybe it's a heart problem. Maybe it's their personal passionate flame that's burned out. Maybe it is just the monotony of what they're doing. Maybe it's family crisis and pressure from society or whatever it might be. I mean, we all kind of go through different seasons in life. Um, Maybe you're not as successful as your parents and you always thought that you were on a better track, or maybe you think, hey, I've got all this education and what I did is not taking advantage of it. You're having some sort of existential crisis. Like I said, I've seen it all. I've seen people make a ton of money and not be happy with their work. I've seen people make no money and be completely fulfilled by their work. And so again, what I'm saying is that it might really help to kind of figure out what the root cause of it is. One, and then also, what are the tactics that we can do to kind of address that specific need, right? Because usually dissatisfaction with the job is not every one of these things, it's a few things, but it's very easy to take the minority of things that bug us and blow them out of proportion. And in fact, if you don't think small things can bug you, sleep in a tent with a mosquito. That's an old saying, I didn't make it up. But some of those small things, some of those nagging things can really maybe encourage you to leave a job that you shouldn't otherwise do. I mean, that you shouldn't otherwise leave, I should say. Sometimes the grass isn't greener on the other side. Sometimes you realize, man, I had a lot of great things. A friend of mine was not happy with her graphical design job at a very, very large company. She made great money, but she just wasn't getting big projects. They were all kind of smaller things, a lot of one-off types of things. She didn't really feel like she was being rewarded with the big projects, and she left a couple years ago. And the thing she was telling me now is she thinks that was probably her life's biggest mistake. It wasn't that she was being overlooked for the projects. It's just that some people were there longer and they got the more prestigious projects. But she was getting good work and doing work that was being seen on a national level. It just wasn't necessarily something that she'd win an award for. But it was great work and she was paid well and the benefits were great and the work life balance was great. And, for all these things, an outsider would look in on it and say, wow, you have got it made. You have got it made. And yet, the person in that role doesn't see it. The person in that role actually wants to get out. And I think that is kind of typical. Now, 99% of it may not be good for you. Some people leave a job where 99% of it is good and 1% is bad, and that 1% is all that they can obsess about. Some people are really in a tough situation and probably should leave their job, right? They may be emotionally abused at work, maybe overworked, underpaid, undervalued. Maybe it's dangerous. Maybe there are all sorts of things. Maybe they're giving up on life and they aren't spending time with their family. Any of these things can be legitimate concerns. And trying to figure that out with the person and trying to come up with a solution that can be actionable within their job framework is great. Maybe we can help them get a new shift or get a new boss or get promoted or make more money in those types of things. So if you can find those things, if you can find those specific itches and help them scratch it, I think that's going to help give them the satisfaction, keep them in the job, because leaving a job, putting your resume together, interviewing, finding another job, finding your pace, finding your footing, getting over the imposter, syndrome and all these things and building rapport with new coworkers and finding your niche and building a reputation in a new job is not easy, regardless of what it is. Even if it's a manufacturing job, it's probably going to take you a couple weeks to feel comfortable. And if it's a professional job, it might take you 6 months to a year to feel comfortable. So, moving is not always the right situation. And so if you can help people within their job, great. And I have lots of tactics for it, lots of tips that I've used, lots of tricks and specific things, and be happy to share some of those. But that's my long rant about that, is that I think for most people, when we hear that they want to leave a job, we immediately assume, hey, what do we need to do to help you move that job, leave that job? But I think there's a lot of value in trying to recover it. Now, that long-winded intro brings me to what I think is kind of the outside of the box thinking on this. And it's not so much that the job is bad and pushing people out the door, but it's a gap of usually to me how people are finding their own fulfillment. And so if you think about it like this, think about it as if, I need to be filled emotionally 100%, right? And for some people, you take a job and it's all glorious in your honeymoon phase and you think it's great and the company has a lot of prestige and they're in the news and you're paid well and your friends are just enamored with what you do and you feel like you have everything that you need, you're feeling 100% fulfilled. But as time goes on and maybe you have to take some training and maybe you're not getting promoted and blah, blah, you know, it's still the job is fulfilling you. You're just kind of maybe realizing that there's some other things that you want, and some of the times those things that you want can't be fulfilled by your job. Right? Sometimes those things that you want, whether it's more voice, more influence, more money, maybe, sometimes these things are have to be found somewhere else. Sometimes we have to relieve the job of providing us everything that falls on our wish list, right? So, how then do I bring myself back up to more fulfillment if the job is only going to fulfill me 60 or 70% of the way, right? So, I still have this gap, 30 or 40% that I need to fill. And this is where I would say this is the power of the side hustle. Now, the side hustle usually implies doing something for money. And I've talked about doing financial coaching is a side hustle, and I'm a big believer in that. I think that's kind of a responsible way to start, and I think that 90% of people will never make the money that they expect to make from it. And it is a hard racket and it's a lot of work, and I think people underestimate what they need to do to invest in themselves. And so I like starting as a side hustle because you're not risking anything. It's going to be just gravy. It's going to be surplus for you. And what it does in that case is it allows you to start filling that emotional gap, if that makes sense, right? So it allows you to have maybe meaningful work, even if it's not bringing in money, right? Maybe it doesn't check the money box, but maybe your job checks the money box, right? Maybe you do this for free as a charity or work with an agency, help the vulnerable population, maybe just help your friends, flex your financial muscle in for good, right? Put on the cape and be a financial superhero for people, right? So maybe that's the gap for you. It's just the knowledge that you're using your knowledge for good, that you have influence, that people are using your help, and that they are accomplishing things, and you feel like you're giving back to society, and you're making your mark on the earth, and you're putting your dent in the universe, and it's filling that emotional gap for you. And what that does is that combined with your job gives you what you need personally. And so even though we look at our job sometimes as needing to fill all of the things that we need to be satisfied with from a career standpoint, maybe we need to fill it with other things, other careers, right? There's no requirement in the world that you only have one role in life, or one role this week, or one role this season of life, right? And so maybe you do have it. Maybe you give yourself the title that you want and you do the work you want. Now, like I said, side hustle usually implies a business, but I'm going to throw in another word here. Maybe it's a hobby. And maybe it's not a hobby like stamp collecting or golfing or something like that, that's just for you for entertainment, but maybe it's something that's meaningful. Maybe it is working with a nonprofit. Maybe you do work in finance and you can do the bookkeeping for a local organization. Maybe you love camping and you can work with, some of the organizations out there that are bringing in you know the youth that are looking for outdoor activities. When I was in Chicago, a lot of people didn't have kids and yet volunteered with the Boy Scouts to help give kids outdoor experiences that they might not be able to get anywhere else. So, families didn't have the camping equipment, didn't have the wherewithal, didn't have the time or resources, right? Up here locally to me, there's an organization called the Chocolate Chip Girls, and it takes minority girls and gives them exposure to workplaces, and to see what it's like to be in different jobs, particularly in the STEM field. So there are a lot of ways that you can take your hobby and have it be really enjoyable and have it also be meaningful and not necessarily just to fill the money gap. And especially if you keep your job and you say, hey, I'm going to double down, I'm going to do my job. I get that maybe I'm not on the career track I want to be. Maybe it doesn't do some of these things for me, but you know what? People might look at you as a community leader because of what you're doing with your hobby as opposed to what you're doing with your job. And maybe you find that the job gives you that balance to be able to do these things, right? And maybe you do leave your job. Maybe you do switch to something else at some point. But I think it's really important to take a look at what you really need and what really is the cause and where you really will get the gap filled. Because sometimes I think it requires you to look outside of where you think you are looking or you need to look, right? So I think sometimes thinking about the side hustle, not necessarily to just fill the income gap, although it can sometimes, but if you look at the side hustle to fill the emotional gap, the fulfillment gap for yourself, it might be able to do that. And you might find that you are able to bring yourself out of the valley and back to the peak without having to leave a job. And I think that could be a really, really valuable discussion that you can have with your participants. So, kind of thinking about side hustles in a little bit different way, with a little bit different deliverable there. So, hopefully that helps. I'm looking forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks.